Sleepovers are awesome. Movies, games, ooh, and most important, horror babe pillow fights. Thumbs up this video right now if horror babe pillow fights are your favorite. But as much fun as a sleepover can be, you're still sleeping in someone else's house, which, in and of itself, can be at least a little creepy.
Back when I was 15, I had a best friend named Sarah. We were very close and often had sleepovers. One weekend we were going to be staying at her grandma's house. Her grandma was a very sweet lady and liked to bring us on little day trips. The plan was, this weekend, she would bring us to the zoo and then we'd stay over her house. This would be the first time I slept over at her grandmother's house. Things went on as planned. The zoo was nice, and sleeping over at Sarah's grandma's house was cool. She let us order pizza, and we got a movie. So later that night, Sarah's grandma had gone to sleep, and we were in the living room watching the movie. I got up and went to the kitchen to get more soda. I walk in. In front of the fridge, I see a huge, dark shadow in the shape of a man. I was afraid to move. I looked at it and it slowly moved away until it disappeared. I was so scared. Remember, I was wide awake. I wasn't tired or confused. I had no questions about what I saw. I ran to my friend to tell her what I saw. It took me a while to get the words out. She believed me and told me she had seen it once before in the hallway by the bathroom. She said it was very late one night. She was going to the bathroom, and she thought she saw a shadow at the end of the hallway. She was very tired, so she dismissed it as her seeing things. We turned off the movie and went to bed in the guest bedroom. We talked for a while before finally falling asleep. Then I was woken up by sounds coming from the kitchen, like someone rummaging through the cabinets. Sarah woke up too. We looked at each other. "Is that your grandma in the kitchen?" I asked her. She didn't think so, so she got up and quickly locked the door. The noises got louder, like someone was trashing the kitchen. Then it suddenly stopped. We never fell back asleep. When day broke, we went to investigate the kitchen, expecting it to be trashed. It was fine. Not one thing was out of place. When her grandma got up, we told her what happened. She said sometimes she hears things and acted very nonchalant about the whole thing. Later, we went on Sarah's grandma's computer to look up the house's history, but we couldn't find anything. The house was built in the 60s. It wasn't that old. Couldn't find any deaths or incidents. I haven't had many paranormal experiences in my life. This one was the scariest. This happened 19 years ago, and I still remember it clear as day. I would still go sometimes with Sarah to her grandma's house. We would hear things moving around, sometimes footsteps. But I never saw that shadow man again. I also never slept over there again.
If that shadow man would have been in my kitchen, he'd be in a world of hurt. Get out of here, you sandwich thief! It's nothing personal. I just need to feed little buddy. If you're one of those people that cares about whether or not other people get to eat, please consider joining me on Patreon. For $1 a month, you'll help me buy clothes, food, violent video game. Oh shit, how did that get in there? No, not the games. Mostly the food and clothes. Ahem. Just $1 a month. Less than 4 cents a day. And you'll help keep this channel going and growing. by allowing me to eat. See if allowing people to eat is right for you. Go to patreon.com/superhorrorshow like these people did, and be cool and share $1 with me. So I tracked down the Shadow Man, and it claimed it was Sarah's grandfather. But I don't trust him. You know, shadow people, they're all pretty shady. You ever notice how little you notice? There's a whole world around you, just hiding in plain sight. Maybe there's a coffee shop you passed every day, but never went in. After some time, days, weeks, months, you lost track of it. It's like it doesn't even exist anymore. But it does exist. Or it did exist. It was the summer of 1992. Me and my girlfriend Tina worked together for a contracting company, and we were on our way home. We lived close, so we would carpool often. We were on a road we took hundreds of times to get to and from work. A few minutes in, I noticed we were very low on gas. So low, I didn't know if we'd make it to a station. There were no cell phones back then to call for help if you got stranded, so we just kept driving, just hoping we had enough gas to make it. Soon we were surrounded by pine trees. It was strange. This road was farms, not forest. We got even more nervous. Then we saw some small old buildings and an old house. In front of one of the smaller buildings were some very old gas pumps. We had never seen this gas station before, even though we'd been down this road countless times, but we figured we somehow missed it and pulled up to the pump. We walked up to the small building. It looked very run down, but there was a light on inside. We entered. It was a small room with a counter. I called out, "Hello? We would like to buy some gas." A strange-looking old man came out from another room. He had on thick glasses and was covered in car grease. I told him we needed gas. He looked at me like he didn't understand. I repeated myself a few times before he then mumbled something and shook his head yes. Then he grabbed a key and quickly headed out to a pump. It was strange how he moved. His movements were almost inhuman. After unlocking the pump, we started pumping the gas. It was taking forever, and the strange old man just stared at us while rocking back and forth. It was very unnerving. Finally, it finished filling, and we paid the man. He took out a blank receipt and filled it out with a ballpoint pen. And we got out of there, quick. We could see the old man waving goodbye as we left. As we drove, the car started to misfire, and black smoke came out of the exhaust. He must have given us diesel instead of regular gas. We made it to a repair station, where they would have to empty the fuel tank by hand. The mechanic who emptied the gas tank said that it wasn't diesel like we thought. He said it looked like gasoline they used back during World War II. We told him where we got the gas from. The mechanic looked confused. He told us there wasn't a gas station there. We told him we'd never seen it before either, but it was there today. The mechanic looked afraid. A few days later, we drove back on that road to try and find that gas station. We couldn't find it. We drove back and forth several times. It was gone. I talked to some people around town who had lived there a while, and they said they've never seen a gas station there. One old man said there had been a gas station there about 50 years ago. We must have experienced some kind of time slip. I still have the receipt the old man gave me at the old gas station.
He has the receipt, and he got the old gas from somewhere. Is this a time slip? Or some interdimensional gas station? I'm inclined to think time slip, because I feel like an interdimensional gas station should have more options for gas. Unless that old gas was far superior. So later on, the guy in this story became obsessed with time and started buying up and wearing watches. He even tried to connect a bunch of watches together to create a belt. Talk about a waste of time!
Disneyland is known as the happiest place on earth, and for many children it is. For some people, a trip to Disneyland was the highlight of their childhood. But as easy as it is to visit Disney, those experiences take a lot of thought, money, and energy to create.
This video's title, Is Walt Disney Haunting Disneyland?, is really asking several questions at once. There's the main question, of course, of whether Disney himself is still walking the grounds at his park. But there's a question immediately beneath that one. What happens when someone dies? What happens to that person's essence, their energy? And if a person invests their love, thoughts, and energy so heavily in one thing, would they be able to stay with it? What if it wasn't a thing at all, but a place?
Disneyland opened in 1955. It was Walt Disney's dream, but still a lot of work. Walt knew he would need a place to stay and live inside the park, so he had an apartment built for himself on Main Street. The apartment was very private, but as a way of letting people know if he was in the park or not, he put a lamp in the window. If it was lit, he was in the park. If it was out, he wasn't around. When Walt Disney died on September 15, 1966, the light was turned off. The next day, the lamp was on, all by itself. Since then, there have been all kinds of reports and even videos of spectral activity. Many people believe it's Walt just walking the grounds, enjoying his dream. With all the time and effort he put into the park, maybe it's where his energy belongs.
You know, I can't blame Disney for hanging around. I've been dead for a while, and I'm still here telling stories. It's where I belong. If Walt is at Disneyland, and I'm here, I wonder where politicians go. On a cold, wet night, a father and son play a game of chess. His mother watched them play as she warmed herself by the fire. "That's some wind outside," Mr. White says, hoping to distract his son. "I can hear it, father," Herbert replies, never taking his eyes off the board. And check. Mr. White makes his move, and again attempts to distract his son. "What poor weather." To which his son replied, "Checkmate," and smiled. "You know, that's the trouble with living so deep in the country. No one wants to travel so far and visit when the weather's poor." Mr. White was clearly sore about losing. "Maybe you'll win next time," said Miss White. When Mr. White looked up, he could see his wife and son smiling at each other. Her slight tease hit its mark. Mr. White was now also smiling. "It's him!" Mr. White hurried to the front door and opened it, revealing a tall man. The man made his way into the home. It was Sergeant Major Morris. The Whites had been expecting him. The chess game was put away, and the chairs were arranged so everyone could enjoy the fire, and some of Sergeant Major Morris's stories. The Sergeant Major spoke of traveling to different countries, wild adventures, and strange people. 21 years, said the Sergeant Major. 21 years of travel. I was barely a young man when I left. I'd like to see India. I've heard it's a beautiful place, said Mr. White. Better to stay home, said the Sergeant Major, as he shook his head. For a moment the room became quiet. Tell that one again, about the monkey's paw, said Mr. White. Sergeant Major Morris's face became gravely serious as he looked into the fire. Miss White poured him some tea. The monkey's paw? Well, that sounds interesting. Whether it was the tea or her voice, the Sergeant Major was broken out of his trance. Very well. He took a slow drink of the tea and pulled something out of his pocket. I have it right here. And in his hand was a small, mummified paw. Herbert took it from him, examined it, and passed it to his father, then asked, "What's so special about it?" Sergeant Major Morris replied, "An old man put a spell on it. The paw has given 3 different men 3 wishes each." Mr. White examined the paw closely. "It sounds amazing." "The wishes are dangerous," said the Sergeant Major, cutting off Mr. White. The Sergeant Major's face went pale, and all at once his face was covered in sweat. Herbert quietly asked, "Did you get 3 wishes?" "Aye." "And did they come true?" "Aye." "And what of the other men that received the 3 wishes? Did you know them?" The Sergeant Major lowered his head and closed his eyes. The first man. I don't know what his first 2 wishes were, but his last wish was for death. "But then why keep it?" said Mr. White. Sergeant Major Morris took the monkey's paw from Mr. White's hand. "I don't know. I considered selling it, but no one believes it's even real. And even if they did, the devil take it!" And all at once he threw the monkey's paw into the fire. Mr. White scrambled to the fire as quickly as he could and pulled out the paw. "Better to let it burn." Maybe. Or maybe maybe I could have it? But before Sergeant Major Morris could even reply, Mr. White had already put the paw in his pocket. So, how does it work? You hold it in your right hand and make your wish. But I must warn you of the dangers. Without a second thought, Mr. White took the paw out of his pocket and held it in his right hand. Sergeant Major Morris grabbed Mr. White's arm and looked him in the eye. Don't make foolish wishes! Wish only for good things! The room had become quiet and still. Sergeant Major Morris looked around and slowly let go of Mr. White. He thanked Miss White for the tea, put on his coat, and prepared to leave. Mr. White walked him to the door. They spoke a little, and Sergeant Major Morris walked out into the night. Mr. White walked back to his family. Mrs. White asked if he gave the Sergeant Major any money for the paw. He did give him a little money, but the Major kept trying to refuse it. He kept encouraging Mr. White to burn the paw. After a moment of silence, Herbert exclaimed, "We are going to be rich and famous and happy! Wish to be a king!" Mr. White took the paw into his right hand and looked around the room. He took inventory, the chessboard he and his son would play games on, his beautiful wife by the fireplace that kept them all warm. I have everything I could ever want right here in this room right now. Even kings don't have that. He started to consider what Sergeant Major Morris had said. Maybe he should burn the paw now. But before he could properly sort his thoughts, Herbert spoke up again. What about buying the house, Father? We only need 200 more pounds. Now that's an idea, said Mr. White. He firmly grasped the paw in his right hand and held it high in the air. I wish for 200 pounds! All at once, Mr. White began frantically screaming. He dropped the paw on the ground and ran from it. Mrs. White and Herbert ran away from it too, though they didn't know why. It moved. When I made the wish, I felt it move in my hand. Herbert slowly approached the paw on the floor, never blinking, just cautiously staring at it, examining it. Well, I don't see 200 pounds. Are you sure it moved? Asked Miss White. Perhaps it slipped a little in your hand when you held it. Mr. White examined his hand. It looked the same as ever, and the room, and the fire, and his family, all fine as they were at the beginning of the night. Maybe I didn't feel it. I'm old. I get shaken up easily. It's very late. I think I'll be off to bed. And with that, both Mr. and Mrs. White headed to bed. Herbert, however, was not ready to sleep yet, so he sat down and continued gazing into the fire. At first, the experience was pleasant. Who doesn't enjoy a good fire? But soon after, he began seeing faces in the fire. They were normal faces, looking at him. Looking at him, looking at them. The faces appeared to be saying something. He went in to get a better look. That's when the faces started changing. Herbert was terrified, but convinced himself it was late, and with all the talk of monkey's paws and wishes, he just needed a good night's rest. The next morning, everything seemed right. It was a beautiful day. As the family ate breakfast, Mr. White wondered aloud, why was I so afraid last night? You know, soldiers, they're all the same. They have many stories, but none are true, replied Miss White. But Morris, he seemed so afraid. He believes in the monkey's paw. I know he does. Herbert stood up. Well, I'm off to work. If the money arrives while I'm gone, please wait to spend it. I'd like to see it first. His mother walked him to the door, wished him well, and sent him on his way. A few hours later, the postman came. Mr. and Mrs. White sorted through the mail. And not only was there not an envelope with an extra £200, but in the pile there was an unexpected bill. Mr. White took the news of the unexpected bill especially bad, and sat there quietly. He was so caught up in his poor mood, he hadn't noticed the man walking outside his house. Mrs. White, on the other hand, had noticed the man. She watched as he walked back and forth, and then back again, standing, looking at the house as if he was searching for something. She brought the man to Mr. White's attention, and the two of them watched as the stranger quietly walked onto the property and knocked on the door. Mr. White sprang up, opened the door, and ushered the stranger inside. The stranger felt off, like there might be something wrong with the man. Mr. and Mrs. White just stood there quietly, waiting for the man to speak. After a few moments, the man said, "I am from Ma and Megan's, the factory in town." Ma and Megan's was a name the Whites recognized. It's the factory where Herbert worked. Mrs. White broke into a frenzy. "Did something happen? Is Herbert okay?" Mr. White helped his wife sit down and asked her to stay calm. For all they knew, the stranger could be bringing good news. The stranger started up again. "I'm from Ma and Megan's, and I'm sorry to tell you there's been an accident. Your son fell into the machinery and was badly hurt. But he isn't in pain anymore." Mrs. White breathed a sigh of relief. "Thank God, my poor boy." She glanced at Mr. White and saw that he did not experience the same relief that she had, and then realized what happened. Mr. White held his wife's hand and spoke in a soft, broken voice. "He was our only child. My little boy." The man couldn't bear to even look at the couple anymore. He walked over to the window, took a deep breath, and recited the following. "Ma and Megan's wanted me to tell you, well, they are both deeply sorry. Everyone is. Ma and Megan's want you to know that they are not to blame for the accident, but they have sent me here with some money to compensate you for the loss." Mr. White turned his head towards the man. He was sweating and trembling. "How much money?" £200, sir." Mrs. White gripped her chest and fell to the floor hysterically. Mr. White sat there in a daze. The stranger walked over to him, gave him the £200, and let himself out. There was a cemetery 2 miles from the Whites' home. That's where they buried Herbert. Afterwards, they went home. A heavy sadness followed them. Mr. White sat down and gazed across the room. It was only a few nights ago he and Herbert played chess. His wife suggested they play another game. If only they played just one more game. Days passed, but Mr. and Mrs. White were trapped. Time moved on, but felt to them like it was standing still. They barely slept or ate, and they didn't say a word to each other. There were no words to say. They were just two shadows moving about. 2 weeks later, Mr. White woke up in the middle of the night. He reached for his wife, but she wasn't there. It was too dark to see, but he could hear his wife crying. He called out to her, "Come back to bed, dear. It's cold." "It's colder for Herbert," she said, and refused to move. Because of how poorly he'd been sleeping, Mr. White was trapped in a place where he was rarely asleep, but also rarely awake. He closed his eyes for what felt like a second, but must have been longer, because when he opened them again, Mrs. White was standing over him, glaring at him. The monkey's paw. The monkey's paw. Where is it? The what? The monkey's paw. Where is it? Where have you hidden it? Do you have it? Yes, of course, it's in the cupboard. Get it now. Dear, please, go to sleep. You're not thinking clearly. Get it now! Mr. White was terrified. Mrs. White didn't look like herself, and wasn't acting like herself. There was no telling what she was capable of. All right, he said, and went off to get the paw. When he came back, he showed it to Mrs. White, who responded by laughing maniacally. We still have it then, and that means we get 2 more. Mr. White knew what she was talking about, but was terrified at the thought, so he pretended he didn't understand. 2 more what? Listen, it's late. You wanted to see the paw, and I've brought it to you. Now that you know it isn't lost, let's go to bed. No. Wish him back. Dear, our boy is gone. You don't know what you're saying. Wish him back! The first wish came true, didn't it? And we get 2 more, don't we? Wish him back now. Mr. White was all at once broken. He wanted Herbert back more than anything, but knew in his heart the paw was evil. It would never give him what he wanted. I can't. Please. Mrs. White quieted down, stood up, and slowly approached Mr. White. She looked like an animal, getting ready to attack its prey. Then let me see the paw. Mr. White's one wish destroyed his family, and hurt many others. Herbert had co-workers, friends, and a woman he was courting, all robbed by one wish. Someone else getting 3? No. Mr. White couldn't allow it. I'll do it right now. Mrs. White froze. Mr. White again held the paw high in his right hand. I wish my son Herbert was alive. Mr. White held his breath as he looked around the room. Nothing changed, except Miss White. She looked exhausted, but peaceful. Mr. White sat beside his wife for half an hour, then said, It's getting late. You don't have to sleep. Maybe you could just lay down and rest while you're waiting. She obliged, and the 2 were soon off to bed. What's that? Do you hear that? It's Herbert! Herbert? No! Mr. White ran to the bedroom door, trapping Mrs. White in the bedroom with him. The cemetery is 2 miles away. Poor Herbert had to walk by himself here. Let me out. He's probably tired. He needs me. Please don't open that door. There could be anything on the other side of it. All night you've been looking at me like I've been crazy. But here you go, locking me in a bedroom because you're afraid of your own son. Before Mr. White could reply, Mrs. White hit him on the head. He fell to the floor, exhausted, dazed, and Mrs. White got around him. I'm coming, Herbert! Mr. White could hear the knocking getting louder, and could hear Mrs. White talking. Hang on, Herbert! I'm too short to get the top lock! I'll get a chair! Mr. White could hear Mrs. White drag a chair across the floor and fiddle with the lock. It was high up, heavy and awkward, but she was only a few moments away from opening it. Mr. White lied there on the floor, pulled the monkey's paw from his pocket, held it in his right hand, and made his last wish. All at once the knocking stopped. He heard the chair fall over, and the door open. He held the monkey's paw tightly in his right hand as he got up from the floor, and went to check what happened at his front door. When he arrived there was nothing. Not only was his son not there, but neither was his wife. He looked outside his front door, but there was no sign of anyone.